Okay. Good afternoon or good morning to everybody. My name is Andrius Kubilius. I'm a member of European Parliament from Lithuania. And we are starting our traditional seminar of the Forum of the Friends of European Russia. This time devoted to one policy paper which we drafted together with Roland Freudenstein, Vladimir Milov, and Sergei Guriev. Together with Wilfred Martin Center, and the paper which is devoted to EU relations with a future democratic Russia, strategic paper. So we shall discuss that paper, but first of all, my job here is to introduce you with moderator of our meeting, again, very well-known person, journalist and political analyst, Konstantin Eger, whom all of us we know very well, and I am happy to now to give the floor to him. So, Konstantin, please start your job.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure and honor to be your moderator today. I think that the order of our work today will be as such. We'll have Dimitar Lilkov presenting giving a very brief outline of the paper. Then we'll have Dimitar is from the Martin Center. Then we'll have Andrius Kubilius, Roland Freudenstein, formerly with the Martin Center, now with Globsec, Brussels section or bureau, and then Vladimir Milov, who I hope will join us from the Free Russia Foundation, give a few minutes of remarks, and then we'll take questions from you. Questions should be written in the chat, and I will be picking them and kind of giving them to the participants together with probably some questions of my own. So without further ado, Dimitar, I would like you to start and introduce the paper about future relations with the democratic Russia, and which essentially... Hello. Who's interfering here? Right. Dimitar, there are several unknowns here, whether there is a future for Russia, whether it's going to be democratic, and whether they're going to be relations. Please enlighten us.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. My name is Dimitar Lilkov. I'm a senior research officer at the Wilfred Martin Center for European Studies. We are the official think tank and political foundation of the European People's Party in Brussels, so it's a pleasure to open up this debate on our policy brief devoted to the future of the EU-Russia relationship. Throughout the years, one of our best research collaborations came about after collaborating with leading EU politicians, which managed to integrate our work in the policy output of the European Commission and European Parliament. And I think that former Prime Minister Kubilius is one such figure. So I would like to express our collective gratitude for his proactivity and expertise in this report. When it comes to the other distinguished authors of the report, the Martin Center takes pride in the fact that the paper is the product of pro-democracy experts with first-hand experience and understanding of Russian politics, economy, society, and culture. I'm sure that they will share extremely interesting insights throughout the discussion, so let me also thank their work on this report. About the report, very briefly, I do not want to go in the report section by section. I just want to mention that you can find the report online, of course, on the Martin Center webpage. It's a paper which, first of all, makes an overview of what went wrong last time when we tried to deal with Russia. We tried to deal with the nascent democratic Russia in the early 90s. What went wrong with our relationship with Vladimir Putin in the early 2000s, and then the report proceeds to enlist a number of steps for dealing with a democratic Russia, touches upon foreign security policy, talks about visa liberalization, talks about energy and climate, of course, rule of law. So I'm sure that the authors of the report will go into more detail. One final word before I give the floor back to you. Maybe let's take a moment to recognize the brave resistance of the Ukrainian people against the Russian aggressor. We see somewhat positive news yesterday and today coming from the front in Kharkiv. So let's hope that the Ukrainian counteroffensive is a success. After all, a strategy for dealing with democratic Russia presupposes that the barbaric kleptocratic regime of Vladimir Putin comes to an end and Russia loses this terrible war. Thank you for this opportunity, and I hope you have a great debate.
Unmute yourself, Konstantin.
Yeah, Dimitar, before you kind of transfer responsibility to other participants, personally, what do you think, in your view, what are the two, maybe three main points in the paper that you find particularly poignant or important?
Honestly, from a very realist perspective, finding the report talks about a carrot and stick approach towards Russia. So from a very realist perspective, is coming up or drawing up this specific approach in all these policy areas, which actually produce an outcome and are not the usual weak and soft documents which come about from European policy circles. But mechanisms and tools which actually have teeth.
Right. So it's unusual realism that sort of impressed you. Thank you very much. I think that's an interesting observation. I also, when I received it, thought that yes. Very frequently, these reports are a bit on the romantic side, but this one, yeah, does look to me, I agree with you, very sort of much more focused. Let's put it like that. Okay, we have a problem with Vladimir Milov connecting via Zoom with us. We hope that will eventually happen. But then I will give the floor to Andrius Kubilius to make his remarks and his comments on the paper. Please.
Well, thanks a lot, Konstantin, and again, really pleasure to see all the participants and especially collaborators with whom we wrote the paper. We see Vladimir is joining us, so it's pleasure to see you also. And first of all, I will try very briefly, to explain why we drafted that paper. Of course, explanation can be very simple because last year in European Parliament, I was as a standing rapporteur, we pushed for a special report on EU relations with Russia, and we said that it would be very important as soon as possible to elaborate some kind of strategic paper, what kind of relationship there will be in between of European Union and future democratic Russia. But that's, formal answer. Not formal answer, and the strategic view, which, I was always having in mind, even when the war started, and not, perhaps not, I would say not many people, at least what I see back in Lithuania or even here in Brussels, are believing in a possibility of the future of democratic Russia, which I think is the wrong approach, but nevertheless, it exactly demands from us to have very clear answer why at this moment we, decided to have such a paper. It comes from very simple logic. There is very strong, I will speak very, very simple things, nothing very, complicated. Definitely, from my point of view, there is the biggest strategic interest of Europe, of European Union, to have Russia as a neighbor of European Union, a democratic one. Because, this is how the biggest threat to security on the European continent can be, dismantled or avoided in any case, When NATO recently in Madrid, summit put a very clear language in their strategic document that authoritarian Russia is the biggest threat to security on European continent, then we need to have very, very clear answers. How we deter that threat, how we are preparing ourselves to defend in a military sense, ourselves from that threat. But at the end, the question is, are there possibilities to diminish that threat? And maybe to create such a situation where that threat will disappear? And the only answer here is democracy in Russia. So will that happen or not? It's a very important question. But first of all, we need to say to ourselves that this is our interest, not only interest of Russian people, or who are standing for democracy, who are suffering because of that, but this is also our interest. And then, if that is our interest, we need to have a strategy, how to assist that transformation. That transformation will be done by Russian people, but it will depend also very much on our policy, on our strategic approach. And if we agree with that logic, then we need to start to look how that strategy should look like. Now, and of course, the strategy should start from very simple exercise. First of all, we need to say to ourselves, in the side of the European Union, what kind of mistakes maybe we made. Oh, we know, what is wrong with Putin. No doubt, we can, speak about him, for quite a long period of time. But we need to look also to the mirror to ask ourselves what kind of mistakes we made, maybe, which at the end led to this very huge geopolitical crisis on the European continent. From my view, one of the biggest mistakes, or two mistakes were, interconnected. First of all, that Putin was very good in convincing some capitals inside of EU that, democracy is not possible in Russia. And then that all those capitals need to adapt to Russia as it is with Putin. And out of that, here was, conclusion that dialogue with Putin is the most important, strategy of relationship in between of EU and Russia. So those were wrong approaches. That's my very simple, conclusion about mistakes. Now the question of, out from those mistakes, what kind of, next steps we can elaborate. And here, what we put into our paper, I would say, which very much is interconnected with what we have said, in our report back in last year in European Parliament, with some addition on because after that, the war started against Ukraine. I would put, just 3 points. What we need to have in mind when we are talking about EU policy strategy, how to assist, democratic transformation in Russia. First thing is, of course, Ukraine victory in the war against the authoritarian Putin regime. That is, the first step, which is absolutely, needed as an, possibility to open, the gates for possible changes in Russia itself. Second, I would stress again, all the efforts and ambitious efforts from EU side to assist, creation of success of Ukraine, not only in defending its sovereignty, but also in creating, prosperous, economically and stable democracy, which comes with integration of Ukraine towards EU. And the last point is really, going with a clear strategic approach, clear strategic attempt to show to Russian people, to communicate to Russian people that, what kind of relationship will be in between of European Union and, future democratic Russia, which would allow, Russian people, to see that, really there can be, how to say, life even after Putin, and the possibility of normal, decent European type of life, which Ukrainians are creating, as a good example for Russian people, they are creating on their soil. But that possibility is also, possible for Russian people, which can come exactly with a, good strategic relationship with the European Union. If in Ukraine, that possibility comes with, Ukrainian integration towards EU, we are not, trying to put the same language when we are speaking about Russia, but, very clear opportunities like visa-free regime, like free trade agreements, like, cooperation in modernization of Russia, technological modernization, and so on and so on. All those things we need to start to talk now in order to avoid mistakes which were done by EU, earlier from the very beginning of 90s, and also in order to show Russian ordinary people, this possibility of decent life in Russia, European type of life, which is possible to be great. If that will happen, we shall see, but that we need to have our own approach and our own strategy and our own efforts. That is for me very clear. So I will stop maybe exactly here. I hope that Konstantin is right here. I saw some disconnections or something like that. So that's
yes,
my
Andrius, thank you very much. Yeah. I do have a problem with the line here. So I hope I'm heard at least. But the line is...
Now we are losing you. Okay.
Yeah, I'm now back, but the line suddenly started to go wobbly. So I'm not sure whether you've heard me or not. Thank you very much. I do have a couple of questions before we go to the audience questions. By the way, I invite the audience to write questions in the chat section of our Zoom screen. But now let us go to Roland, and then Vladimir will be the last, but not least definitely, to speak. Roland, bitte.
Dankeschön. Thank you very much, Konstantin, and thank you, Andrius, for putting this illustrious round table together. I would like to focus maybe not so much on the mistakes of the past. That Andrius has done that very well. I totally agree. But I would like to throw out a few ideas about this imminent question: can Russia become a democracy? Does Russia have a future? And indeed, will a Russian democracy be less imperial than the Russia that we've seen in the last 22 years and maybe more? First of all, I think that a new East-West split is developing in Europe, in the European Union, between those that think the alleged agreement among 80, 85, 75, whatever % of Russians to the war is proof that Russians are in their vast majority opposed to any idea of a Western democracy, and that therefore, for example, the visas, tourist visas, should be completely scrapped. There is another opinion that says, visas, tourist visas, even if they bring some of the bad guys to the European Union, they will still help the people who are fleeing from Putin and the people who are opposed to Putin to actually be active and effective, and also for normal Russians to actually see a different reality than the one they are fed by Russian media. So what I want to say, I don't want to open up the visa debate at this point. What I want to say is that this controversy in the European Union, which ended for the time being with a compromise, but it's still going to continue, this controversy shows a new split about how to look at the Russian nation as a whole. And this contains the question, can Russia become a democracy? Can we develop any kind of partnership with Russia in the future? And there is a sizable part of the European Union, unfortunately, that at this point says, no, we cannot. And Russians will have to be treated collectively as a guilty nation, guilty of a war of aggression against Ukraine. I see the point. I also see many of my Ukrainian friends saying precisely this, refusing even to engage with Russia's democratic opposition. My line is that because no single nation on earth is unable to develop a democratic system, Russia can also become a democracy in the future, and that therefore it is in all our interest to support Russia's democrats. And what that entails, for example, in terms of visa, in terms of support for democratic Russian NGOs and so on, these are different questions. But what I want to say is that I would like to passionately claim here at this point that Russia's democrats deserve our support and that Russia can and should become a democracy. Now, about the interplay between an imperial Russia and a democratic Russia, Zbigniew Brzezinski has very well argued decades ago that empire and democracy are mutually exclusive in Russia's case, that Russia is either one or the other. As soon as it becomes a democracy, it will not want to and be able to remain an empire. And as long as it remains an empire, it can actually not be a democracy. I would like to take this as my main argument that indeed a Russian democracy will, maybe not immediately, but in a relatively limited amount of time, also let go of the idea of a Russian empire, near abroad, whatever you want to call it. Many people would answer at this point that even Yeltsin had imperial tendencies, but if you compare that to the Soviet Union or Tsarism, this is no comparison. Yeltsin was certainly on the best way that we've ever seen in Russia in the last 100 years to actually normalize, over time, normalize relations with neighboring countries. And this would be our hope for a future democratic Russia. So by the time
to round up, Ronald.
Yes, just one last idea here. Our relations with Russia can only fundamentally change when Putin has left the Kremlin, in whatever physical state or shape or form. Now, by the time Putin leaves the Kremlin, Russia is going to be in a very terrible state. Russia's situation at that point in time will be such that any of Putin's successors will have huge incentives to do things fundamentally differently. So, you know, when many of my friends in the European Union tell me that, oh yeah, well, we can see even worse than Putin. Yes, the crazy general. Yes, the Ramzan Kadyrov, whatever, taking over Russia. I do not think there are enough crazy people in the second and third echelons of power to actually seriously believe that Russia has any future with that kind of development. And I can imagine, on the other hand, that there's a lot of people who believe that Russia must rethink some very, very fundamental things. And that means rethink the last 22 years, or by that time it will be 23, 24 years of recent history, and do things in a completely different direction. And that can only mean becoming, maybe after a period of instability, but becoming a democracy, developing cooperative relations with the West, and ending for good the idea of empire and any kind of sphere of influence. That's what I would like to contribute at this point. Thank you.
Roland, thank you very much. But a very brief follow-up, because we're talking about, well, momentous changes in Russia. What is, at least in the first approximation, the time frame you are thinking about, or the authors of the paper are thinking about?
Well, I'm sure every author has their own. I can only speak for myself, and I see this kind of, I see the beginning of this development that I said, the exit of Putin from the Kremlin. Maybe they have to carry him out, you know. Maybe he won't even be in one piece. This I can see this in a matter of somewhere between 9 months and 5 years. That would be my wild guess.
That's fast, but let's see. Thanks a million, Roland. Stay online. Before I give the mic to Vladimir, I just want to tell you that I want to tell the attendees that you, I see, for example, someone, I know who, raising a hand. Please write your questions in the chat, because we probably will not have time for an open mic session. So do write the questions, and I will pass them on to the panelists. I don't think we'll have an oral debate here. Vladimir, all the way to you, please. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear and see me well. I also had some problems with connection. And I wanted to begin by thanking Andrius, Roland, and all the colleagues who are still invested in the idea that Russia can be and will be democratic at some point in the future. And we will have to build a normal, solid relations that will exclude in the future such type of events as we see today. I know that it's very difficult to talk about this now on the background of this imperialist monster that we are currently witnessing. But listen, I mean, there are all objective signs out there, and I wanted to address this determinist attitude in the first place, that, you know, Russia will always be imperialist. It rejects, overwhelmingly rejects Western democratic values and so on. There's overwhelming evidence that this is not the case. And what we are seeing right now is the result of extreme brainwashing and propaganda that we saw in the previous years. And I personally remember, and I'm sure many of you can also recall the events that happened, like, 20 years ago, when, according to opinion polls, over 70% of Russians had positive view of the United States of America. When we have signed a number of, actually a flurry of bureaucratic roadmaps with European Union about creation of multiple common spaces, when even as late as in 2004, you can open the Russian Economic Ministry website and see a poll which asked visitors, should Russia formally apply for European Union membership? You can recall Vladimir Putin speaking at the Rome summit with NATO in May 2002, actually praising NATO for great contribution into enhancing the global security. And that was already in the presence of new member states. Hungary, Poland, and Czech Republic were already new members, with a lot of others expected to join soon. Putin was specifically asked there in Rome a question about Ukraine's aspirations to join NATO. And he said, well, that's totally fine because it's a sovereign country and they have to cooperate with NATO anyway. So there were totally different times. And I don't remember even working in the government. I don't remember this dominating imperialistic attitude. It seemed like back then everybody was okay that we all will be integrating into a common joint European space based on free markets, freedom of movement, freedom of travel, and so on. I can also recall times of 30 years ago when actually we went against the Communist Party in the Soviet Union holding Ukrainian flags, Lithuanian flags, and we very much supported the aspirations of our neighbors for independence. So I think that's a lengthy talk, but generally, if you take like whatever, opinion polling data, electoral behavior, current surveys of political situation on the ground, a majority of Russians would still want to influence political decision-making through democratic institutions. They do not like the situation when Putin and his government have deprived them from any right to influence politics. You can also see that attitude towards different countries if somebody likes, I can send you this graph. Radio Liberty made a very impressive graph over like a 20-year span. A question was asked, which countries do you consider enemies? And you can see clear peaks associated with propaganda, like in 2007, when we had this issue with Estonia and the bronze soldier. 70% said that Estonia was an enemy. That's about 15 now. Same thing with Georgia, same thing with Turkey or other countries. It comes and goes with propaganda. So my strongest advice is not to take this current propaganda and disinformation and brainwashing bubble as a given, not to fall into his determinist trap. The other thing I wanted to say is that, yes, in the current environment, where Putin has sort of let loose completely, he does not want to respect any of the any beat of the international rule-based order. He doesn't want to take any liabilities. He's ready to be medieval, brutal, sadistic, and all that stuff. He's unrestrained, and that is absolute true. There's no denying that. He's supported by a significant part of the Russian population. So there is a debate now. How do we deal with this imperialistic monster? Essentially, it comes down to two strategies. First strategy is to try to isolate Russia. So the visa ban debate is generally a part of that. We cannot do anything about them, so let's isolate them. I would argue that the strategy aimed at isolation of Russia will not work, because it's not possible given the structure of a modern world. And we can see it already happening in the past 6 months. There is no such thing as isolation, but you are only pushing Russia towards alliances with China and other autocracies. So as a matter of fact, it would strengthen the autocratic alliance. If you would try to completely isolate Russia as a country, as a nation, and so on, it is also a very costly option. So working towards giving Russia a chance to become democratic and to live at peace with other countries, with the rest of the world, is a much more viable. It might seem in the short run, it might seem implausible, but in the longer run, this is a much more viable and much less costly option as opposed to isolation, which once again, I think not only will not work, but attempts to completely isolate Russia will push large parts of Russian society, which are currently not necessarily with Putin, either anti-Putin or more or less passive. But attempts to isolate Russia are actually pushing these parts of Russian society towards being embraced by Putin and somewhat helpful to his agenda. So in this regard, difficult as it is right now, reaching out a hand to Russian society, showing that, yes, we understand the complexity and we don't want to fall under the spell of cliches. We don't treat you all as Putin's accomplices. We lend a hand to those people in Russia who want to build a normal democratic state. It's a lengthy way to go. It's painful. You will have to do a lot of homework, dear Russians. But I think that is the message. That is a much more viable and forward-looking, as opposed to, I think, unworkable strategy of trying to isolate Russia as a country. And I think also, again, we have a lot of baggage and learning from the past. I think also it is doable. Right now, we really, as Andrius said, we can approach this point when Russia will have a democratic chance in the future. We can approach it better prepared. I remember those times, and that was a big problem, that neither the United States nor Europe was particularly prepared for the collapse of the Soviet Union. So there was no blueprint on how do we bridge the gap and integrate democratic Russia into a common space and make it adhere to democratic rule-based order. Now we will have a better chance. It will not be easy, but once again, I wanted to thank Andrius, Roland, and all the colleagues for still keep trying, because I think that's the only way to go. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Vladimir, and thanks for being succinct and time-wise sort of brief. I have a follow-up to you, just as I have two follow-ups, just as I had for Roland. First, what is your time frame? Okay, we're both born in Russia. We probably kind of have a feel for the country. What is your time frame for all this?
first, my approach to timeframes is let's hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. Mm-hmm. Because first, it can really happen very quickly. You, Kostya, I'm sure you remember the last controlled Soviet elections in 1984 under Konstantin Ustinovich Chernenko. Yes, it was like 99.9% turnout, and all these people voted for the Communist Party. If I remember, I was 12, and I remember how my parents went to vote. So if we thought back then, and in just 3-4 years' time, we will be allowed to rally on the street with "Down with the Communist Party" slogans, everybody would think you're crazy, right? But it happens. I think eventually these events would be centered around the personal departure of Putin, whatever way he departs. So that there is a chance that this might happen relatively quickly. We're talking like a few years framework. However, there is no reason to give up, even if it's a lengthy process. So Russia still aspires, and deep inside, it wants to be democratic, which means that if Putin's imperialist policies continue for some lengthy years ahead, this is also not the reason to give up. So that means it can happen quick. Let's not indulge ourselves into dreaming too much about it, because when dreams crash, it's sometimes painful. So can be different scenarios, but it can happen very quickly, unexpectedly.
Another follow-up, which I promised, actually it stems a bit from what you said, and from what was mentioned previously by both Roland and Andrius. There is this perception that the regime in Russia will not survive if it is defeated in its war against Ukraine, but if it loses this war, and especially if it loses the Crimea. Do you think that this is the important and maybe the only benchmark people are talking about now? Do you think that it could also happen some other way? But first, do you agree with this perception that the regime will not survive losing this war? And secondly, could something evolve in some kind of other different way?
Yes, I think that a military defeat or like significantly military setback, let's put it that way, will be a fatal blow to this regime. But I'm also a believer on like all of the above strategy, pressure from all sides, not only military defeat, but other forums, including tightening the sanctions and enforcing them better, including also working with the Russian public opinion and turning it against Putin. So the more successful are all of these efforts, the quicker will be the fatal cracks in this regime. And I would like to say one thing. I'm a former bureaucrat and know a lot of people there. What happens is extremely exhausting for them. They are, including Putin, all of them are under great stress, with no clear positive prospect. This is actually why, if you listen to Putin, what he says publicly in the recent weeks, he's trying to convince everybody that, listen, it's not at all that hard as everybody is talking about, which means that, yes, indeed, everybody is talking about exactly that, how hard it is for them to withstand all the current pressure. So there is all the motivation for anybody else except Putin to quickly turn around the policies once he is personally gone. Current environment creates great stress for the system, great exhaustion for the system. So we need to double down, and we need not to give up hope that sooner or later it cracks.
Thank you, Vladimir. There are lots of questions to follow, and I hope that will basically spark a debate. I was told by the organizers that we can switch on microphones, and we have Genady Gudkov, who is asked to be, who asked for a possibility to intervene. Genady, the floor is yours. I also see Maxim raising his hand, so he's going to be next. Genady, the floor is yours, but not too long, please.
Unmute yourself, Genady. Unmute yourself.
Микрофон включите, Геннадий, а то у вас нет, вот посмотри, у вас микрофон выключен. Включите микрофон. Геннадий, микрофончик. Пожалуйста.
Как сейчас?
Вот отлично.
Yes, my English
Только
is
не так быстро говорить, чтобы переводчики успевали переводить.
And slower, please. So good.
not so good as yours, but I'll try to do my best. Thank you very much for the possibility to take the floor, and my regards to all who speaks right now. Only several words. I think it's a mistake to repeat Putin's propaganda that 90% of population supports Putin in the war. It's not so. It is really first weeks when war started, approximately 60, 65, 70%. It depends on different regions, different social layer of population supported real war against Ukraine. But now the situation changes. Maybe it changes slower than we would like to change, but it changes every day. It aggravates the situation, the common situation aggravates, and people now are in internal immigration. Great number of people now are in internal migration. They do not speak about war at all. And according to my researches, I do it through media, through social media and through social nets. Less than half of population, much less, now supports Putin. It says that they start to realize that the war has no good end, first of all. And we must understand that less than half of population supports Putin, even being under pressure of propaganda and being and having somehow imperial mentality. Second, very important thing, up to the year 1991, we were one people. I mean, we, Ukrainians, Lithuanians, etc. And we, unfortunately, suffered from Bolshevism, from communism, from military style of governing of the country. But the problem is not mentality. The problem is a form of government. And if power is changeable, if we have democratic basis for this power, yes, we have different branches of this power, executive, legislative, and juridical, we can have the other mentality. For example, Ukrainians used the same time to make democracy. We used this time to build again a kind of dictatorship. It depends on the form of power, nothing more. I don't trust in special mentality of Russian people. Never thought so. And the main thing to my mind now, of course, military victory of Ukrainians in this war. But second, we will have very small chance to take power. I mean, Russian opposition, and to start to build democracy in Russia. Very little chance because separatists настроения, I don't know, spirits are in the air, and many people now claim to split Russia into different parts. I think it could be very dangerous not only for Russians but for Europeans, for European Union, and for the whole world, because nuclear weapon and many other things which cannot be divided between different peoples. I think we could have, in this case, we could have a very big civil war inside the country.
Genady, 1 minute, no more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, you can finish, but I give you 1 minute, okay.
Yes, that's why we should think how to govern Russia after Putin. We should start this process now. And we must realize that Russian people are the same people. In fact, maybe very little peculiarities, but the same people which can build democracy and freedom. Thank you very much.
Genady?
I can.
Genady, thanks a million. I think that we have another participant. If I guessed correctly, Maxim Kiyak is a Ukrainian political scientist who also, as far as I understand, works for Europejska Pravda. Maxim, are you there and can you speak?
I can speak. Actually, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
we can. And I would
Sure.
like to ask the others, excuse me, just 1 second.
Sure.
I would like to ask the others to write their questions. If I don't have questions in writing, I'll continue interrogating the participants on my own. Maxim, the floor is yours, please.
Yeah, I'm afraid that the chat is disabled. That's why I decided to answer my question in this way. So first of all, greetings to Roland and Andrius. Really great to see you. Thanks for your report. To be honest, I haven't read the whole report, but only some of the pieces. And I think that this is quite important work that you have done. But to my opinion, when we speak about the future of democratic Russia, I think we have to bear in mind how does the face of the future democratic Russia looks like. So, because even when we say about democratic opposition, so-called democratic opposition in Russia, they are still using some imperialistic narratives. And when we say about the future Russia, we have to also to remember that up to 90% of Russians are still, supporting the war against Ukraine. So my question is really simple. How does the face of the future Russia looks like? It can be some person, can be a group of people, but still, is there any chance to have this face in the upcoming future? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maxim.
Unmute yourself, Konstantin.
I would like to start. Thank you very much, Maxim, for this kind of brevity. I would like to start maybe with Vladimir in the reverse order, and then ask for brief comments from both Roland and Andrius, and then we'll go to further questions because the chat is enabled, I'm being told now by the organizers. Yes, I see that it's enabled. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. There can be different faces of the future Russia. We have to fight for it. It's not a given. This is all what the approach is about, that there are different trends inside Russia now, so we got to encourage positive trends and not to discourage them, like by repeating these false narratives, lies, and propaganda that Russians are imperialists, Russian democratic oppositions are imperialists, because this is absolutely untrue. A lot of this rhetoric is built on absolute misinterpretation, sometimes outright lies of what Russians are saying and what positions they stand on. So there can be different faces, but one thing is very certain. There is a general, very raw-shaped, but a genuine bottom-up demand for democracy, government accountability, and the right for Russian citizens to actually influence the politics through democratic procedures. This is not, I mean, what happens right now is not compatible with the idea that all Russians are imperialists, because, yeah, if 90% of Russians are so bloodthirsty imperialistic, then why Putin does everything possible to suppress expressing the free expression of will of the people? Why doubling down on censorship? Why putting people in jail for just going out on the streets with some slogans? Why introduce a new article to criminal code with 15 years in prison for just speaking the truth? If 90% of Russians are imperialists, then let's have a free and fair election. They're going to elect an imperialist anyway, right?
Can I interrupt you here, Volodya? You know what's going to be the because I have to play the devil's advocates here. You know what is going to happen? I think that's pretty plausible. When they have free and fair elections in Russia, it's not going. I mean, I'm sure you'll be elected, but you are not going to be in the majority. You're going to have at least two parties, whatever their names are. Yeah. One will represent this kind of kick all the non-whites out of Russia, kick the Kyrgyz back to Kyrgyzstan type of nationalist party. And another one will be, let's strip the oligarchs down to their bones. Let's redistribute wealth, a kind of new communists, whatever you call them. And they're probably going to form a majority. What about that?
Kostya, before we analyze the probabilities, let's go back and revisit what happened before when we had like relative elections. These extreme nationalist parties, like you mentioned, the maximum result that they enjoyed was 9% for Rodina, Rogozin's party, back in 2003. We have extreme imperialist parties like Starikov's Fatherland or Fedorov's Nod. Their rallies gather like 100 to 200 people max. Their visibility in the polls is negligible. If you really look at Russia's voting behavior in politics, that was overwhelmingly mainstream. Yeah, there were some unpleasant elements, both communists and the far right part, but largely Russians tend to vote overwhelmingly mainstream. Very little examples of extremists being elected anywhere to public posts. So the danger is there, but let's not scare ourselves. Like, you know, if you unleash this Russian beast, it will go and chew everybody up. Putin, yes. Russian voters, no. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you'll have to have another united Russia or Nash Dom Россия for them to vote mainstream. That's the lesson of the last 25 years at least. But I'm only partially joking. But you know what? We do have suddenly, when they opened up the chat, we have an avalanche of questions. So I will be now very sort of strict with timing, much more strict than I thought I will be. Roland and Andrius, and thanks, Vladimir. Stay online. Your brief thoughts in response to Maxim, and then we'll go back for another round of questions.
Yeah, thanks, Kostya. And this is really warming up now. It's getting interesting. Vladimir just answered Maxim's very, very pertinent question. Hi, Maxim, by the way. In talking about the extremists, but I want to talk just 2 seconds about the middle ground, about the gray mass of people in Russia. And I also want to talk about how imperialist is the opposition. I mean, we've all heard what Vladimir said about the war, about the imperialistic monster, about that Russia has to lose this war, Ukraine has to win this war. I mean, yes, there are quotes by Navalny where he said very interpretable, very unclear things, and if you have a sufficient amount of bad will, then you can say that Navalny argued something stupid about Crimea. On the other hand, Navalny in recent years has absolutely not only condemned Putin, but also recently now condemned the war. The attitude of the Navalny opposition to an imperial Russia, I think, is absolutely clear, and it's absolutely negative. And this also needs to be taken into account. I think Putin, on the other hand, has a great interest in making it look like Navalny is just another imperialist. You know, he's maybe a little bit more democratic, but he will ultimately be a populist, and he will want to have another version of imperial Russia. Well, I say no. I mean, at least the friends that I have, like Vladimir and others, do not fit this cliche, and this needs to be emphasized. And just one last point here. You permit me to speak as a German, if I may. I just imagine what it must have felt like for the few German Democrats who did exist in a year like 1943, right? I mean, they were, of course, happy to live in Western countries, and some of them fought alongside Allied forces, actually. And the Allies themselves knew that they would need democratic Germans to build up a German democracy, which, by the way, is also was the basic idea why the US dropped the concept of a collective guilt in the years after 1945, which had been official US and Western Allies doctrine about how to treat post-war Germany. And they let go of that principle because they said it's ultimately going to be detrimental to the build-up of a German democracy. So that's it for me now. I think we really need to discuss in detail this question of, how imperialistic is the democratic opposition to Putin? I would have a lot more to say about the moment Putin hopefully leaves the Kremlin, but I'll leave that for later on in the debate. Thanks.
Andrius, but please be brief. Thank you, Roland.
I will try. Yeah, Roland picked part of my answer. Because when somebody is saying that, look, Russians in majority are supporting the war, 80% or whatever, I doubt about those numbers. But I'm always saying, look, in Nazi Germany, Germans were supporting Hitler. No doubt, in majority. And now we are, we are enjoying democratic and stable Germany. So the question is only how they change, I will not elaborate in that, defeat.
Occupation, we know it.
Yeah, occupation, defeat, Nuremberg, Adenauer with the support of Americans, and then, Marshall Plan. But it happens that, nations are, because of propaganda, because of whatever, they are, for some period of time, they are making some kind of those huge mistakes in their, in their sentiments. But my take is very simple. I think that also Russian people are quite rational, and they try to succumb to this, post-imperial nostalgia, which is, again, quite an objective feature in all the former empires. And what they got out of that? They got Putin, who started, invasion into Ukraine, and that is when Russia is kicked out from all the global markets, all the global economies, and that is, which means that Russia will suffer because of that. So Russia became rich when, during Yeltsin time, or even Gorbachev time, and then Yeltsin time, Russia became part of global economical processes. Now with, with that post-imperial, sentiments, Russia got out from that. So I think that Russians will be able to learn the lesson. If you are going into this, imperialistic mood, you are suffering. Yourself, you are suffering, Not only Ukrainians are suffering. So this is one thing which brings me, some kind of hope that things after Putin can be really different. Second, I think that, in all the authoritarian regimes, people are loyal to the regimes while the regimes are able to improve their life. If that is not possible anymore, people's loyalty disappears very quickly. We saw that in Belarus and so on. So the same will start to happen in Russia, I hope.
Before I give the floor, the debate is really spinning out of control, I would say, in a positive way. We have many questions. I thought, and I see Ivan Yurov and Denis Kazakevich, and I'll give them, I will ask their questions, but I do see Eva Quistop from, as far as I understand, the Green Party and the descendant of a prominent anti-Nazi fighters. She's actually putting out a lot of messages, and I think that instead of reading them all, I would like to give her a floor briefly to, as far as I understand, argue a bit with Andrius and Roland, as far as I understand. Eva, are you ready? If you are, switch on the mic, please. No, we don't see any reaction. I hope Eva Quistop will join us a bit later, but for now, a very direct question. I think I would address it to Vladimir from Denis Kazakevich. It's a question to Vladimir Milov, actually. How will future democratic Russia will solve the Crimea issue? Vladimir.
Very simple. We fully adhere to 1991 borders. We respect the Belovezhsky Agreement when the Soviet Union was dissolved. So that goes to Crimea, Donbass, Transnistria, Abkhazia, South Ossetia. They should be, they are part of the relevant countries. Abkhazia and South Ossetia are part of Georgia. Crimea is part of Ukraine. Transnistria is part of Moldova. How many times do I have to repeat it? I mean, I'm doing it every week on my live streams, but I still keep being asked those questions. I mean, like Led Zeppelin had a song called How Many More Times, but I'm ready. If that convinces somebody, I'm ready to repeat it time and again.
Put it as your ringtone. I think that the next question, two questions come from Ivan Yurov. And I would like to ask Mante and our assistants to probably help Eva Quistop to ask her question and make her remarks in audio. Ivan asks two questions. One is about the headquarters for the Russian opposition. Now, with the Russian opposition mostly being outside of Russia, he thinks that there needs to be a kind of coordinating center. Where will it be? Will it be outside or inside Russia? Where? And question number two is actually about the future structure of Russia. He suggests that some kind of controlled disintegration with a kind of European Union style confederation, something like that, would be plausible and would eliminate the kind of imperial ambitions if you have several states that unite in a confederation, probably with common foreign policy, currency, and stuff like that. So who is prepared to take it up? Because I do think that Vladimir, Andrius, I see, please speak up, and then I'll give the floor to others.
I will speak on the first question about coordinating center, but I see Genady Gudkov still here. As I understand, people like Vladimir Milov, Genady Gudkov, and others from democratic Russia, they are establishing exactly some kind of coordinating or secretariat center here in Brussels, which we are very happy. That's for in some way for pushing exactly EU proper strategy towards democratic developments in Russia. So that's what I wanted to say. Unmute yourself. Yeah, you are Konstantin.
If Vladimir and Roland do not want to add anything on this specifically, then another question from Ivan Yurov about... Yes, please, very briefly.
Of course, shortly. First, on disintegration of Russia, that's largely a wild speculation, which people actually put the analogy with the Soviet Union, but the situation is very different. In Soviet Union, former Soviet republics, there were genuine, very strong bottom-up movements for liberation. There's very limited number of these separatist trends in the Russian region, so I think that's an exaggeration. We'll be happy to elaborate further. On a coordinating center, listen, there are two things. First, we do try to coordinate the positive activity targeted at the Russian society and changing the public opinion in Russia. The other thing is trying to create a KPSS type, the one central committee and so on. This, I think, given the experience of past years, is counterproductive because people will spend time bitterly arguing who is the boss. So to my point, we need flexibility. We need coordination in specific actions. I don't think we need a coordinating committee because given the previous experiences, it always ended up badly arguing who is the main oppositioner here. This is the least thing we need right now.
Ivan specifies his question. He says he doesn't speak about disintegration. He speaks about reform from the top, essentially creating or refounding Russia as a kind of very loose federation or probably even confederation. He doesn't mean disintegration because some parts of Russia want to leave. So he wants you to follow.
So may I clear that? I think every major opposition group in Russia would agree there is a consensus that we need a very significant devolution of powers from the federal center. Government to parliament, center to regions, regions to municipalities, big devolution across the country so that it becomes much more decentralized than it is now. So I think there is like a more or less consensus on that.
Including a possibility of confederation rather than federation?
It really depends. I mean, we leave it up to an open discussion in a democratic society because we do not think that we should produce like a blueprint for everything. There's got to be a big room for debate, which will produce both the feeling what people really want and also what decisions are plausible and what not. So this is devolution is clear. Extent of it will be determined by public debate.
Okay, thank you very much. Roland, briefly, yes, please.
Thanks. Yeah, on this question of the cohesion of Russia and the centrifugal forces, which allegedly there are already tiny signs of it now, like people in Siberia saying, "Oh, this is Moscow's war. This is not ours," and so on. But you can bet that when when regime change happens, it will happen as a consequence of a sudden simultaneous emergence of several dramatic crises. One of them is, of course, that the war is lost. That there's a military defeat. The other one is the economic crisis is really biting. And one of them will be centrifugal forces suddenly becoming stronger. And then you might have collapse of public order of to some extent. And, you know, I mean, yes, Putin can put 150,000 people in prison, but he can't put 1.5 million people in prison. It doesn't work that way. So, and this is really what's happened many times in the past in dictatorships. As soon as you have a critical mass of people that are not afraid, the dictatorship crumbles very quickly. So at that moment, the question of the future existence of Russia itself will actually be probably the most convincing argument for some people in the apparatus of power to actually change the system and to say that, okay, well, we need a state of emergency for a couple of weeks or months, but we will present a plan how to get to some kind of devolution of power within Russia, of course, and also some kind of checks and balances in the foreseeable future. This is my speculation. But what I want to say here on this discussion of centrifugal tendencies, this will be a decisive factor. And when all these crises happen at the same time, I think it will reinforce the argument for someone in the Kremlin to say enough of Putinism. We need to completely turn things around.
Eva Quistorp, who informed me that she, as far as I understand, probably for health reasons, cannot speak today, follows up straight to you, Roland, because she says, you are very optimistic, Roland. Look at Venezuela and China. Your response?
Yeah, everything happens for the first time, sometime. But no one would claim that this thing in Moscow will go smoothly. But Venezuela and China, I mean, are completely different cases. China is still relatively prosperous, and the prosperity is one of the elements of the Communist Party's contract with the people. I couldn't predict what happens when this prosperity is gone. Venezuela, it's a sobering example, but the circumstances in that case are obviously still favorable to the regime. There is not enough pressure. There are not enough simultaneous catastrophes in the country, which, however, I would assume will happen simultaneously in Russia at some point in the next couple of years. So Venezuela hasn't lost a disastrous war against a neighboring country, for example, which is something we are all assuming now for Russia's future in the next couple of years. So I think that's one of the decisive differences.
Yeah, they were lucky not to go for the invasion of Colombia. And by the way, Igor Kolchinsky from the audience reminds us that we shouldn't forget Belarus is also an example of things going boom for the dictator and then stabilizing. But Igor, I think we more or less, Roland already replied to that. What I can say for a second, not assuming my moderator, or rather shedding my moderator powers, that who knows, maybe Belarus will be the point where everything will ignite, and no one knows. It's also part of the unpredictability.
May I, Kosta, for a second? May I interfere? I think we see a clear 21st century pattern: Syria, Myanmar, Belarus, Venezuela, where dictatorships are only being saved from revolt by their own people by a major international involvement of autocracies, who are there to help to save them with military power, with money, and so on. That was the case in all of these countries. In case of Russia, if Putin's regime crumbles, no one is there to help him and to save his dictatorship.
Yes, although, as you know, I know quite a bit about Syria. there was also the two parallel processes. There was civil war actually going on there. That should be admitted. But let me go to very briefly to finish this debate about potential Russian disintegration. I have my views on that, but I will keep them to myself. Denis asked a follow-up. What about Chechnya, Vladimir? And I think a lot of people would like to ask about the future of Chechnya.
Let's ask the people of Chechnya first. This is actually because they have never been asked this question, and there was in 1990s when Dudayev seized power, there was a significant debate inside Chechnya about the future of this territory. It was crushed. It was crushed by Dudayev's guard, and in 4th of June 93, they had their own Tiananmen, right? So it's up for the people of Chechnya. We are absolutely calm about Chechnya choosing its own fate, but it also should be a peaceful and democratic process, pretty much as happened like with other Soviet republics during the last year of the Soviet Union, which we all accepted their independence. So it should be here this time. Chechen people should be given a say here, not at gunpoint from either side, right? But the free will and their free expression, and they will choose their way forward.
Vladimir, thank you. I have a very interesting question to slightly sort of veer off, and Eva will ask a question a bit later, but I see an interesting question from, let me see. Yes, Jan Johansson. And it's about Putin. And we didn't talk about him enough today. So he gets his chance. Jan asks, during his latest appearance in Vladivostok, it appeared that Putin is still convinced that there will be a positive outcome of the invasion of Ukraine. Trade with China and India is increasing, and Russia manages to create havoc in Europe thanks to the energy blackmail or weapon. What are the prospects that Russia will prevail after all? Let me ask Andrius first.
Well, at least I learned one lesson from Putin, successes, that he is much more successful in achieving totally opposite to what he was, declaring. He wanted to stop, NATO enlargement, especially towards the borders of Russia, and he got Sweden and Finland, He was always declaring that Ukrainian nation is not, a nation, is not a country, and he got, pro-Western Ukraine, which is, fighting for their sovereignty in a successful way, and which will integrate towards EU and possibly to NATO. So with his attack energy, what I call, Putin's winter war, 2.0, against Europe, of course, he's targeting, to fight for what we can call, hearts and minds of European citizens, trying to create some kind of backlash, chaos, and so on. Here will be, problems, definitely, but I'm not so sure that Putin will achieve what he wants. At the end, I see that Europe is gearing up, in preparation for all the challenges in the energy sector. I hope that quite soon we shall have, all the needed answers, how we shall go through that winter. The winter is really challenging, but also Putin is doing a great job pushing, EU for more quick or more effective implementation of Green Deal. And I think that, he was also very good in convincing Europe not to come back to become dependent on Russian gas, especially during Putin's time.
Thank you very much, Andrius. Yeah. I'm really sorry, but I think you made yourself clear. Vladimir, I'll give you 1 minute to comment on this possibility of Putin winning the war, and then we'll go back. We'll go to other questions, please.
There is no option for Putin to win the war because his most potent combat-ready forces, experienced, trained forces, have been decimated. They are irreplaceable. The quality of human force that he's mobilizing is negligible. It's just cannon fodder, nothing beyond that. He cannot wage a complicated war right now. He cannot really do a major offensive. And he was also deprived from capabilities of attacking Ukraine from the Black Sea. His fleet is essentially incapacitated and so on. So, I mean, militarily, he cannot advance. He cannot advance. He now wants to move this towards an attrition war. He believes in his resource supremacy, like he has like infinite resources on all fronts, shells, missiles, human power, oil, money, and so on. But there is nothing which can give him this decisive victory. So I think there's zero chance that Putin might win.
Thanks. And it also seems that some of the arsenals, of high-tech arsenals of his, are depleted significantly. Yelena from Ottawa, as far as I understand, Yelena Ottawa is just like a nickname. I presume that Yelena is from Canada. Would you agree, she asks, that we, the global community, need a new type of European recovery plan to plan the recovery of the whole Europe, including Russia, once it will become possible to introduce changes in Russia? And if yes, how would we proceed to develop such a plan? I would like Roland to start here.
Yes, the German Marshall Fund of the United States has just come out with an interesting study about the rebuilding Ukraine, and they estimate that we need at least 750 billion euros for that. And that's just Ukraine. And interestingly, they say that this should not be under the leadership of the European Commission, who has declared itself ready to do precisely this kind of thing in past months, but that it should be a G7-led effort under the coordination, at least the coordination of the United States. Now, whatever is going to come out, but I would say that, yes, rebuilding Ukraine, but also rebuilding a post-Putin democratic Russia will require enormous energies and, of course, financial resources. And whether the rest of Europe will have to be rebuilt is an entirely different question. I think I hope that since we are not going to have a big war in Europe, NATO versus Russia, this will not be necessary. But yes, our economies will have to recover, and it's going to be a completely different world than what we have known in the last even 50 years. So it's going to be uncharted territory. But I trust that the Western democracies, together with a victorious democratic Ukraine and after some time, a democratic future Russia will find ways to cooperate. And I tell you what, the world's going to be a better place then.
I think we have another question, which is an important follow-up. And I would like to address it both to Andrius and to Roland. And it's an old friend of ours, Jill Doherty, is asking, will this kind of paper or this program, as far as I understand, meaning the one that's presented, this plan to change Russia, basically, how will you proceed with it if you only have on board the pro-Western Russian liberals? Will you expand the circle of people with whom you work on the future of Russia? I think the inference, and Jill was in Russia in the 90s, that the circle of reformers was very narrow and pleasing to the Westerners, but not to the Russian people. Roland, you start, and then Andrius.
Well, I think indeed it's Andrius who should answer that question. What happens next? I'm just a humble worker in the vineyard of the Lord. So seriously, I think at this point in time, let me start differently. I'm your Lord. I'm your Lord. So
if the moderator tells you to start.
Yes, sir. When we started writing this, that was a year before the full-scale invasion by Russia of Ukraine. So things have changed slightly, and I think today we look like we were writing a far future science fiction, whereas we have to more focus on a near future cyberpunk novel. So that would be my answer. I think the next step would be much more to focus on the immediate future and how to support Russia's democrats who are either in prison or in exile, most of them, and how to prepare for the moment when power changes, hopefully, in Russia. And the question of the relation between the European Union and the post-Putin Russia will maybe be of a secondary priority in the immediate future. That would be my line. But I think Andrius should really answer the question.
Andrius, please.
Yeah, well, thanks, Roland. I don't know if I will manage to answer, but first of all, what is this paper about, and why we wrote that paper, and why we wrote, with what you call, or somebody calls, Russian liberal opposition. Unfortunately, we do not have today Sergei Guriev because of his very busy, schedule now leading Paris University. But simply because I see really our task to, in some way, to assist Russian people to try to have another dream about future of Russia. For some period of time, Russians had a dream to restore empire. Some Russians, they got what they got, They got Putin, they got war against Ukraine, they got, Western reactions, they are kicked from global economical processes. And that is what, where that wrong dream, led Russia, to go. We are trying to show that there is possibility to have another, dream to become a reality. For Russia to become a normal country. What does it mean normal? Like we are, normal with decent life, with some kind of Russian, traditions and so on and so on. So that is what we are trying to do. We try to, in some way, to invite for such kind of thinking about what is another dream for Russia. Now, second point is what we are trying to do in that paper. I think that, and we put that language, that what we politicians, we are making some kind of mistake, and maybe that mistake was also back in 1990s. That we are concentrating on, all our discussions are about the moment of change, about that night when Democrats suddenly will come and, will replace, Putin and his authorities, which is very important to understand how it can happen, But, if we are looking into real democratic transformations in different countries, we need to see two major points. One is how that, change is coming during one night, how to make it as peaceful as possible. But the second question is, how then to assist this young democracy, to become stable democracy? Because young democracies always have the same challenges. People are expecting from young democracy miracles, and miracles, as we know, being, how to say, of the senior age, miracles are not happening. And people, because of that, they are very easy, going back to some kind of nostalgia to the past and so on and so on. And if to look into European and especially post-Soviet, regions, post-Soviet countries, the only way in which, we got an assistance, to overcome all those, nostalgias to the past back in 1990s, it was from EU, with promise of EU, from EU, to assist us. Well, we got a promise of, integration and so on. That is not perhaps available for Russia, for the democracy of Russia to become a member of EU. But then the promise of, of EU. So in which way EU will help young democracy of Russia to stabilize is very important. And it should be very instrumental. We need to see how we shall, what can be, what we shall offer. And that should be developed now, not after, this change will happen in Russia. So that is why what is our paper about, And we hope that this is a relation of discussion, both on Russian side and on the EU side.
Andrius, thank you very much. Next question, we don't have much time. Next question is actually from Nino Gelashvili. She asked how to create a demand for democracy in Russia. Yes, one cannot say that all Russians are imperialists, but that does not necessarily mean that those who are not imperialists find democracy as something useful and attractive. Vladimir.
There is a demand for democracy, like anywhere you look. If you just study Russia a little bit deeper beyond headlines, you would see that Russians have never accepted, throughout this whole years of Putinism, they've never accepted abolishing direct popular elections of governors of regions, mayors of cities and townships. Like healthy 2/3 always wanted it back against Putin. When you see a real competitive regional election with unpredictable outcome, you see enormous surge in turnouts. There was a question like, why are you only talking to pro-Western liberal Democrats, but there's this whole bunch of other guys out there? Listen, but all these other guys, if you listen to what they're saying and look at their programs, they also want the same thing: government accountability. Even, you know, Stalinists who say they admire Joseph Stalin, they're rallying on the street demanding free and fair elections. A lot of people, we spoke about devolution of powers from the center to parliament, to regions, to municipalities. Even the communists and hardcore nationalists support that against Putin's policies. More attention to social policies, responsible social policies, to environmental policies, less dependence on this raw material oligarchic economy. This is a wide consensus among a totally different political forces on the spectrum, not only liberal Democrats, but also the others. So we have, I mean, there's so much more in common between Russians and their normality than meets the eye. So I just suggest that this topic is studied further. Yes, there is this issue of foreign policy, imperialist or non-imperialist, but on a broad range of issues, there is a sort of public consensus which is largely against Putin's policies of the past quarter of a century.
Thanks, Vladimir. It's pretty much time for us to say goodbye. I leave one last question from Anton to maybe either Andrius or Roland, because it's addressed to, I think, mostly the Europeans. After the regime has fallen, how do we make sure that the argument for cooperation with Russia is not muted by views that Russia should be punished? Basically, will it be a Versailles or will it be a 1945? Roland, the floor is yours.
Yeah, but this is exactly what I was saying in the beginning. We're having a widening gap between East and West in the European Union and NATO, but also within countries, obviously, about this question. And those who say Russia should be collectively punished are the ones who believe in collective guilt. And the ones who say that we need to be a little bit more selective are the ones who are saying the concept of collective guilt is detrimental to our interests. But let's be under no illusion. Ultimately, the question of Russia's future is solved by Russians. And foreign influence can work a little bit in this way or a little bit in that way, but no one can decide what is going to happen in Russia and how Russian democracy will, whether it will survive or not.
Roland, thanks for your brevity. And this is all for today. I would like to thank Vladimir Milov, Roland Freudenstein, and Andrius Kubilius for taking part in this amazing session. Thanks for everyone who asked questions. Those whose questions I didn't ask, I'm terribly sorry. That's the only time I had. Antoine Arjakovsky, you can get in touch with me regarding your specific questions because I think I can answer it myself. And thanks to everyone, and hope to see you again. All the very best.
Thanks a lot, Konstantin.
Yes.
Thanks a lot for a great job. Thanks. Bye to everybody.
Спасибо.